We are looking to approve a grant agreement with Chestnut and Myrtle LLC in the amount of $500,000 to incentivize the construction of new rental housing as part of a mixed-use development at 708 Chestnut Street and authorize the appropriate officials to execute the same. So first, I wanted to let you know that I do have signed grant agreements and the covenant restriction and personal guarantee. Those were dropped off on Friday. This incentive request we received a few months ago, and the CRA trustees authorized me to develop a grant agreement in March to work on that and bring it back to you. The proposed project is 5,425 square feet of commercial space, 14 apartment units, and 17 parking spaces. It would be a significant renovation of a dilapidated building downtown. Now, part of when you adopted the downtown redevelopment plan, we said we want to allow for incentive request, right? A plan can't imagine every possible project that could happen. And there was a framework, a policy framework, and a series of questions that the CRA trustees adopted to consider whenever they were looking at any incentive. Is it compliant with, federal, state, and local laws, which this is a legal use of CRA funds? Does it fit the downtown redevelopment plan? And it does. I've outlined several policies and objectives there that show the desire and support for housing and for mixed-use redevelopment. Has the private sector attempted to implement without incentives? And the answer is no. The current economy does not support the construction of new multi-story housing without public subsidy. In the past 20 years, every multi-story housing development has benefited from a city or CRA subsidy. I think that's important to note. The amount of subsidy has ranged from $354,000 to $1.9 million. And without this incentive, the applicant will renovate the existing building to create a one-story office building and surface parking lot, or will demolish the building and place the land for sale. And I think when we think in terms of an incentive, if they simply build a one-story office building, that's zoning compliant. They will have to meet the downtown design guidelines, and that's fine. The incentive is to get them to build something that our plan desires and is not currently being constructed now. So the grant is 15% of the total project cost, or about $35,000 per unit. If you were looking at a housing project with federal or state funds, they allow up to $45,000 per unit for renovation. So it's well within established practices for a per unit cost. I'm going to pause there. I would like for Assistant City Manager Delk to share with you guys what we've learned from HRNA studies on our housing market in terms of the feasibility, right, in the next 2 to 4 years of private market rate housing being constructed. And then I know that the applicant, their attorney is here to present additional information. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers and back and forth. But just before I turn it over to Michael, what you're being asked to vote on today, right, is a grant agreement that says if you build these 14 units in accordance with these plans presented within 24 months, then we will reimburse you up to $500,000 towards your construction costs. So it's not just spent on land purchase or on salaries, it is for actual construction. So they have to submit invoices, paid invoices and receipts, and then we reimburse based on money they've actually spent. So with that, Assistant City Manager Delk.
Yeah, well, I would, thanks Amanda, Michael Delk, Assistant City Manager. The HRNA folks, as you all are aware, and I think I believe we've sent some of this information out to even the new council members. If we've not done that, we'll get that done. But did their economic analysis as the update as part of the request for proposals, and I think their recommendations to us was that one of the stronger areas of our market is some of the residential development, and recommended that we pursue that. We do not yet get the per square footage rents that would really afford somebody the opportunity typically to do structured parking, more urban development patterns, but that's what we're continuing to try to work on, is to get those rents, the rent structure up in the downtown Clearwater area so that we can provide structured parking and more urban development pattern. So I think, in this regard, housing is one of our primary focus activities. And so that's for that reason, we recommend that your consideration of the grant award.
Great, thank you. And if there aren't any questions immediately, Brian Unks Jr. is here to present the applicant's request.
Thank you, Director Thompson. Mr. Mayor and CRA members, can you hear me okay through this mask?
Yes.
Okay, very good. And I usually use the overhead projector, but I understand that's not available today. So I'm going to be holding up documents in front of the camera, most of which should be in your packet so you can know what I'm referring to. As Director Thompson and Assistant City Manager Delk explained, this is an incredible opportunity for the CRA to not only activate and rejuvenate probably the most significantly blighted property in our downtown core, but also to incentivize sorely needed workforce, more affordable housing. As is noted in Director Thompson's report, the economy does not support construction of multi-family housing in downtown Clearwater, and particularly on this site, this blighted site, without a subsidy. In the last 20 years, there has not been any multifamily development in downtown that has not either received city grant funding, FHA affordable housing tax credits, and or CRA grants. And those subsidies have ranged just on the city end from $354,000 to $1.9 million. The last affordable housing project that was developed was the Madison Point project. That project is on Martin Luther King. I was the attorney for Madison Point. As some of you may know, when we talk about affordable housing, truly affordable housing that receives affordable housing tax credits from Tallahassee, from the Florida Housing Authority, it is highly competitive and highly litigious. For the Madison Point project, we were in litigation for over a year and a half with a project that was in Largo. And ultimately, we won that appeal. But when the city agrees to invest in affordable housing that goes for fair housing tax credits, it is a multi-year process with no guarantee. We saw that recently with the Station 45 downtown fire station, where Blue Sky Communities came in with a great project, mixed use, retail on the ground floor, and multi-family development. They were seeking $17 million in tax credits for a $22 million project, or 75% of their project budget. In this case, you're being asked to approve $500,000 for a project that's in excess of $3.3 million, and you get a guarantee it's going to be built. So you don't have to worry about whether this is going to go through an appeal or whether the Tallahassee administrative law judge will agree that it's entitled to any additional subsidy. And that subsidy is only 15% of the project budget, which is much lower than we've seen in some of the other projects that have actually gone for the affordable housing tax credits. I did want to point out that we sent an amendment, a proposed amendment to the agreement and to the restricted use agreement yesterday. I was just recently retained on this. Oh, and I can use it here? Okay. So now I'm being told maybe, okay. I'm just going to read this to you guys. I don't know, James, were you able to, can you upload that email or? Okay. All right. So in terms of the parking issue, I know from watching the prior CRA meeting, the March 16th CRA meeting, that that the parking issue was a concern, particularly related to the retail. There are 17 on-site spaces. So essentially all we did was amend the grant agreement and also the agreement for restricted land use to require the applicant to maintain not only 17 on-site parking spaces, but also a minimum of 8 off-site parking spaces, which are within 350 feet of the property. And we've already got agreements in principle from neighboring landowners to that effect. But what that would be a legal document, either a license agreement or a use agreement that would be executed by the property owners, presented to Director Thompson as evidence that there are an additional 8, minimum of 8 parking spaces that can be used. Those spaces could be used either for residents, they could be used for employees of the retail and employees of the complex, and let the residents and the customers park on site. So we've addressed that issue, and that's put out into specific amendments to the grant agreement and to the land use restriction document. And I believe Ms. Thompson, or Director Thompson, indicated that she's in favor of those revisions and didn't have any issues with those. Obviously, I defer to city legal staff if they have any other revisions, but I think those are pretty straightforward. And one of the issues I wanted to address with you today is, what exactly is it that you're being asked to approve? CRA funding, TIF funds are not ad valorem property tax dollars. These are not taxpayer dollars that are coming from the beach or Countryside or Morningside or Skycrest. These are incremental increases in the taxes paid by downtown property owners. So the funds that you're being asked to incentivize this workforce housing project, this mixed-use workforce housing project, are actually coming from the folks that are being taxed, coming from the downtown property owners. So I want to make that very clear as well. Another issue I wanted to just address too is the CRA still has ample TIF funding available through the rest of this fiscal year. Even if this $500,000 subsidy is approved, you still have $1.5 million available to award to other projects, whether that be restaurants, retail, additional affordable housing, hotels, whatever it is that you can attract to downtown. You still have a significant amount of funds available to you to utilize. And I think that rejuvenating, regenerating, and activating this extremely blighted property will certainly be an incredible incentive to others to take that step to invest in downtown Clearwater. I wanted to run through some specific portions of this agreement. This isn't, you're not just giving them $500,000. They have to be accountable. They have to present proof in Section 5 of actually incurring the costs on the development of the project. So you're agreeing to 50% of the project's costs up to a maximum of $500,000 only if the developer obtains a final certificate of occupancy within 24 months and produces evidence that it has actually incurred these project costs. So this isn't $500,000 that's going into the pockets of the developer. This is $500,000 that is actually going into the building. And they have to provide evidence of that. And they don't just get the funds. They don't get the funds unless and until they get a certificate of occupancy. After the certificate of occupancy, they must maintain these 14 units as rental units for a minimum of 5 years, must maintain the 17 on-site parking spaces, and with our amendment, must maintain a minimum of 8 off-site parking spaces. If they don't do that, they're in default and you get your money back. You might say, well, how do we get our money back from an LLC? There's a personal guarantee from Mr. Emrani and Mr. Cassano. So not only do you have the LLC on the hook, you have a personal guarantee from the 2 members of the LLC. So the city is protected in that regard. And the agreement for restricted land use is a covenant that runs with the land. So in the event, they can't assign this document, so they can't just flip the property and sell it. They have to maintain it for 5 years. So there's no risk of them getting money and then selling the property. But even if they had a successor to the property, this restricted land use agreement runs with the land and would inure to that person. I know you guys know where this is. I've got an aerial here. You can see the current site conditions. I took some pictures yesterday. People, they're moving some things out, making hopefully room for what is going to be this renovation. What has been proposed and has been taken through the BPRC is this, your 3-story south elevation, 3-story east elevation. All of the parking is going to be in the rear, so none of the parking will be on Chestnut. We don't like off-street or parking directly on the street, especially when you're pulling out onto a busy street like Chestnut Street and Court Street. So all that parking is now being moved to the rear.
Mr. Ox, could you pause for one moment?
Yes.
Joelle, is the public seeing this? Which is good. We have the handouts, but okay, very good.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I also wanted to point out that they've already been through the BPRC process, and that's obviously not a development approval, but all the disciplines from planning, development, engineering have taken a look at this already. And as you can tell, the staff is enthusiastically supportive of it. I wanted to show you on the downtown plan where this property is. It's in the downtown core. It's in the southern portion of the downtown core. As you know, it's a major corridor, highly trafficked coming off the beach. As you might recall, on the adjacent corner, we recently got rid of the Parthenon, which was probably the other most blighted building in downtown. And I just wanted to read you a couple portions from the Clearwater Downtown Redevelopment Plan, particularly about the downtown core. This is in the downtown core section, page 54. Since 2004, technology and IT businesses have expanded in the district, and 2 large residential developments were completed: Station Square, which, as you know, was completed by Mr. Cassano, and Water's Edge on Osceola Avenue overlooking the waterfront. The district's residents are older on average, mean age of 64.1 years, and have the smallest household sizes, mean people per household 1.3 persons. Further, the district has the highest median home value, $277,600, and the highest median home rents at $1,768, as well as the highest median income at $56,429. The district also has the highest concentration of white residents in the downtown planning area at 97.3%. And those are the demographics of the downtown core, which is where this workforce housing would be. At the end of the downtown core section, under district vision, it says people are the heart of any thriving downtown. And as such, a key component to the revitalization of the downtown core is to attract residential uses while allowing a variety of housing types and prices. Once a residential base is firmly in place, retail, restaurant, and service uses will likely follow. And that's exactly what this project's accomplishing. As you also may recall, the former Tampa Bay Times building, which is just down the street, is likely scheduled to become a new PSTA stop at some point in time. This mixed-use residential will certainly go hand in hand with that type of multimodal development, which is a long-term strategic goal. It's not going to happen overnight, but these are the types of projects over time that will support those goals. And I think that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer those, or if you want to ask the staff, I can defer back to Ms. Thompson.
Any questions for Mr. Onyx from the council? Mr. Bunker.
Yes, well, I did have some questions. I was kind of hoping to ask Mr. Cassano or Mr. Emrani as I watched their last appearance. I'm happy to see that they're planning changes for this property because it is an eyesore and it has been for a long time. When I think of urban blight, this is always the building that pops up in my mind. I watched again the first appearance they had before the CRA, and I found myself agreeing, as I did the first time I watched it, that with Mayor Creticos, who had thought that $500,000 for just 14 apartments just didn't make sense. There was also the problem of not having enough parking spaces. I'm glad that there's been some solution for that, because at the last meeting, Mr. Cassano said, well, they're going to have to fight every night for a parking spot. That's why it's not going to cost much to live there. But I was curious about their plan B, and I wanted to ask about that because they seemed committed to, if this funding didn't come through, they would renovate the bottom part of the building and lease it out to a tenant, and they had a tenant in mind. I was curious, and I don't suppose you'd be able to answer this, why the two of them, Mr. Cassano and Mr. Emrani, paid so much more than the assessed value of this property. It was assessed in 2018 for $585,000, and they purchased it in cash for $750,000, right?
Is that your question, Mr. Bunker?
Well, that is a question. Yeah, that if you agree that that's the truth, I can continue with the second half of the question.
Well, I guess I'll just address that point. So
okay.
I wasn't representing them when they purchased the property. I didn't represent the seller. I didn't have anything to do with that transaction. I can tell you, as I previously said, I did represent Paradise Ventures Group, which developed the Walgreens, and they tried to get control of that property. And at the time, the asking price was something like $1 million. So I can tell you that assessed value from the property appraiser is not what a seller is going to accept. It's not an asking price. And in 12 years of doing this, I don't think I've ever seen a commercial piece of property sell for the assessed value of the property appraiser. It's almost always at least maybe 15, 10% lower than what the fair market value would be in a private transaction between bona fide purchasers for value.
Well, that's interesting, because
I can point out one property that sold far below the assessed value. It was this very same property. Back in 2010, this property was assessed for almost the exact same price of $513,000. Mr. Cassano and Mr. Emrani bought it from Dr. David Minkoff and his family trust. In 2010, Dr. Minkoff bought the property for $200,000. So they got it $300,000 lower than the assessed value, and we're asking for $1 million. I find that curious.
Yeah, and Mr. Bunker, again, I was not involved with any of that in 2010, and neither were my clients.
That's why I wish they were here.
Well, I don't think it's relevant to the application either, but I can address your questions. If you have questions about this application, I can address those.
Sure. Well, I just wanted to, I was hoping to get some answers from them because this property was purchased in 2018 during the period from 2017 to 2019, where virtually all of the available property downtown was bought in cash from for we don't know what. Now, I'm very happy that Mr. Cassano and Mr. Emrani actually came forward with a use for the building.
Exactly. Thank you.
And I was thrilled with their plan B, which sounded like, okay, we're going to make this look great. If we don't get the $500,000, and then we've got somebody to lease the property, somebody in line who already wants to do that. And I had hoped to ask Mr. Cassano if they plan to lease it back to Dr. David Minkoff or one of his associates. So Minkoff would make a huge profit and still maybe get a sweetheart deal to use the property, which has been in the hands of one Scientologist after another for decades as it's fallen into disrepair. And online, when we posted the video of their first appearance, so many people came forward to say, oh yeah, that's been used by Scientology for decades. More recently, it's been used for storage for Scientology. Prior to that, a few years ago, people were apparently training for being an auditor there. That's according to Aaron Smith-Levin in a Facebook comment. And there was one woman who back in the 80s said, well, I did the upper level OT3 course in that building. So when we're looking at all of these properties as a whole, and I'm going to talk about this more at the city council meeting because we want some answers about this, or at least I do. And I was hoping Mr. Cassano and Mr. Emrani might be able to shed some light into all of this. All of these properties that were purchased during this period were bought at a considerable profit. In this case, it was almost $200,000, but most of the properties were sold from one Scientologist to another, and all of them sold for 2 to 4 times the asking price. So anyway, I just saw this as an opportunity to see if Scientology had any role in organizing this process. But I'll move on from that. So I am concerned because Mr. Cassano said he was pretty committed to Plan B, which wouldn't have cost the city a nickel. But then I went to his realtor site, Station Square Realty, and he's had this listed for sale on the site for $899,000. So he didn't ask for the exorbitant amount you asked. He was just asking for $899,000, which was profit enough, I suppose. So I guess that's. Mr. Bunker, do you have any more questions about the item? I
don't think so. No. Okay. I would ask. Let me ask this because it's. I'm assuming that it's not illegal or improper for an elected official of the city to be buying a property and receiving $500,000 for that. If it was, it wouldn't have gotten this far. It just seems kind of improper. I mean, I feel guilty just taking a Diet Coke out of the mini fridge at City Hall. But it's that type of good old boys network dealing that seems to give
both developers and politicians bad names. But I don't have a question about that.
I don't understand your comment.
Understand my comment?
I don't.
Well, you know, they're elected, both of them are elected officials to the Downtown Development Board. In fact, Mr. Cassano at the last hearing said that they had been talking on the Downtown Development Board about using some of the money from that board in this area where he just bought this property. And it seems kind of like a self-dealing type of interest to me. So apparently it's not illegal. It just, I don't think it looks good. I'm assuming if it was illegal, I would have been told already.
Ms. Aiken, can you comment on that? Are DDB board members elected officials of the city of Clearwater?
They are elected officials of the DDB. They are not of the city of Clearwater, and there is no legal relationship between the CRA from which he is asking for this incentive and the DDB.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Beckman.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. I'm a little concerned about the 8 extra parking spaces that lease, and how long would that go? So if they remodel this building and they've secured leases for 8 extra parking spaces, that's not indefinite. That's not for the life of the building. I mean, how meaningful are those 8 extra spaces going to be? I don't hear.
Mr. Augst, I think you're muted. In the control room, turn on the library, please.
Doesn't look like he's muted, but it doesn't appear that the sound is coming through.
Can you try to speak again, Mr. Augst? Or someone? Not yet. No sound.
Hello? Can you hear me now?
There you are.
All right, well, how many lawyers does it take to unmute a Zoom? I don't know. Okay, so I believe I heard Councilmember Beckman's question was related to the how long the leased parking spaces would actually be available to the development. This development agreement requires the units and the parking to be maintained for a period of 5 years. The units have to be maintained as rental. The 17 on-site spaces have to be there, and the 8 up to minimum of 8 off-site spaces have to be there for a period of 5 years after the certificate of occupancy. At that point, the grant agreement and the land use restriction terminate, and so the property would essentially be, unencumbered by any kind of agreement at that point, whether it's for the parking or for the rental units.
Okay, I find that a little concerning. I know that we have a huge need for more affordable housing or workforce housing, and that's what you termed it, was workforce housing. So I'd like to have it longer than 5 years. And I'd also like to understand better, your concept of workforce housing. And I'd like those apartments to be, as reasonably priced as possible at 80% AMI or something. Can we articulate that in this? And so that's one question. I have one more after that. But.
Well, I'll just give a little bit more information on the first part. When we were structuring this deal and going back and forth, we had to keep in mind that this is not an affordable housing agency, right? These are private developers, so they're not in the business of, asking, having certain income requirements that are federally or state mandated, tracking that, filing reports on an annual basis. It isn't a land trust or a land bank, any of those kind of things, right? So we're trying to find that middle ground, because remember, we are getting 14 units at $35,000 per unit. In no world could the CRA construct a housing unit for $35,000?
Mhm.
Right. So I think that certainly if the CRA trustees feel that they want to put additional restrictions in this grant agreement beyond what are there, then we can ask the applicant's attorney if they're willing to meet that. In my opinion, they're going to be charging closer to about $1.50 per square foot, which is less than the Nolan and Apex 1100. And I think that's a little bit optimistic, that $1.50 per square foot. So I feel that naturally we are going to be in the workforce amount.
Yeah.
Brian Ox Jr. will respond.
Thank you, Director Thompson and Councilmember Beckman. And this is something I explored because I knew it was a concern. We're not a housing authority, so I'm not sure legally we can restrict based on income. It's subject to the Fair Housing Act, which does not allow for discrimination of any kind, whether it's income, race, sex, gender, sexual orientation, anything like that. So I am not sure that we can legally restrict residency of these apartments based on income, since we are not a housing authority and we're not receiving affordable housing tax credits from the state. Having said that, my client wants to reiterate, this project has no amenities. There's no pool, there's no restaurant, there's no bar, there's nothing you would anticipate in a luxury condo or a luxury apartment. And the rent is going to be around $1.50 compared to $1.80 or $1.85 that you get at the Nolan or at Apex 11. And again, this is only the third apartment. This would be only the third apartment in all of downtown. So we think it's, when I say workforce housing, I didn't mean to imply it was going to be affordable housing. And I was clear that it wasn't. But what I would call it is more affordable housing, which would serve our workforce.
Right. Right. And when I think of workforce housing, I look at our average income at 45,000 or so, and what can people afford? And I get that. And I just, that's very important to me. I would hope that we could extend, the rental for longer than 5 years. I do have, and the apartments look very nice. They look like, something that's going to be charged more than, what most of our residents can afford. And while they don't have amenities, the location is pretty great as far as being on public transit, being able to walk to the beach. It's less than 2 miles probably to the beach. But I do have a question about that. If you want to pull up, or if we all have a visual of this, there's like a green rectangle section right to the west of that building. Who owns that, and what's that going to be?
Yeah, that's the out parcel. That is owned by the person that owns the Walgreens. I haven't had any interaction with them. I represented the original developer, not the current owner of the Walgreens. My understanding is they're out of state and they're intending to use that as a buffer for the Walgreens. I read that in the Times. So, I believe that was researched. My clients had reached out to them, and that parcel is not for sale. So my understanding is it's intended to be a buffer between this property and the Walgreens.
What's a buffer? What does that mean? Because it's a lot of land,
I agree. I wish, like I said, my original client tried to get control of this entire block. And I'm glad that my current client at least has control of this piece and wants to redevelop it. It's just out of our control. We've tried, and it's not for sale.
Okay, so your current client has it and wants to redevelop it at some point, but I'd advocate for, let's keep it green for those people who live in that, who are going to move into this building or whatever, to have a place to walk their dog or something like that.
Yeah.
I also have a question about it's the applicant and property information form that the date of application was February 13th of this year. And if I did my numbers, and I could have made an error, but it seems that, the property owners paid $750,000 for this piece of property. They have a loan for $750,000. And then Mr. Shahab is going to put in $1 million. He's asking for $500,000 from the city, which comes to a total of about $3 million. And then it seems that they're going to be short $600,000 because they have articulated at number 2, the total project cost is $3,600,000. So where is that extra money coming from? And how do those numbers line up?
So there's no loan on the property. There's no mortgage. It was purchased for cash. And my clients, you know, they have significant cash and credit resources. That's not going to be a problem. The budget is conceptual at this point because, you know, while we went through the BPRC process and went through the planning department and have a site plan and everything, they're not going to invest significant funds into developing something that the city doesn't want. So if the CRA says we don't want this, then as Mr. Bunker said, they would go to Plan B. So the budget is kind of a moving target, but I'm assured that they have significant resources, either through credit and also cash, to come up with the difference. And if they don't, you don't pay the $500,000 because they never get a certificate of occupancy. So there's no risk to the city if they fall short.
Okay. It does, just so I'm clear on how I read this stuff and understand, but number 4 says, the city asked what other source of funding have you secured? And it says, we paid $750 for the land in cash. We have a $750,000 loan received, you know, that can go towards the 1 million if needed. And we have an additional 1 million available if we get incentive from the 50% owner of the LLC. So I just didn't know what that, I guess you're saying they don't have, or they have a loan available to help them bring it up?
Like a line of credit, right?
Okay.
And so the
Okay.
750,000 cash is already gone. That's already been spent. So
Right.
I'm kind of, that's already out of the budget, I suppose.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hamilton.
Thank you. Excuse me. This project is, I'm torn on this project because I mean, personally, 14 units, 14 apartment units doesn't move the needle for me very far as energizing our downtown. But on the flip side, because like I said, you know, if we could put the same $500,000 into a really good restaurant on Cleveland Street, or, you know, a proprietor that wants to put a really good restaurant on Cleveland Street, that restaurant could bring 700 or 800 people a week into our downtown in the evenings and whatnot. But a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush, as they say. You know, we've waited a long time and done a lot, and oftentimes we seem to have waited for that perfect opportunity, and it doesn't seem to come. I'm not real happy with the, you know, parking situation on this. 350 feet is longer than a football field for the extra parking for the people, but it's not something I can't live with. But I believe it's, you know, in the final wash on this project, if we approve it and move forward with it, we've got another example to show prospective investors that will follow after this project. This is what we're doing. This is what we can do. And this is not the last $500,000. This is not the last money that we have in the fund to do this type of project. So while it's, you know, it's not a perfect project in my eyes by a long stretch, it's better than anything else we're being offered at the present time. So, and yes, I've grown up in this city. This property has looked the way it has probably before I got out of, almost basically the time I graduated from high school, and that was almost 45 years ago. So, you know, it's something is better than nothing. And if this will add to our ability to attract future investment with the lack of anything else on the horizon right now, I think I can agree to move this forward.
Councilmember Albritton.
Yeah, I kind of agree that this this corner has been blighted for as long back as I can remember. I remember there was a furniture store there at one time, and that was a long time ago. And I was really looking forward to doing something with the north side of that block where the Walgreens is. I know it wasn't the highest and best use there, but it sure looks a lot better than what was there. And that's kind of the way I look at this. You know, this is what the CRA money is for, is to fix up our downtown. If we can get some living units in there, that goes a lot further than giving grants to restaurants that never seem to want to take advantage of it. So I do have concerns about the parking. I've discussed that when this was brought up at the last meeting. I wish that they could have got the buffer. I think at that time, the owners were thinking that they had a good chance of doing it, but that kind of is gone now. But it's a good design for that corner. And I think it's a good use of our CRA money. And it's something that, as Mr. Hamilton said, you know, bird in the hand's worth two in the bush. And I think if we can proceed with this, it'd be a great, almost like the fire station. That's a great project for downtown. This is going to be another one. So I'll be supporting this.
Thank you, Councilmember Albritton. Mr. Onks, just a couple additional questions. I mean, originally they said they were going to be spending 3.6 million. Now in our agenda item, it's 3.3. Is this stick or block construction?
I have to ask that. Block construction? Yeah. Yes, it's concrete block construction.
Okay. And I can't get the exact square footage. It's so small, even with a magnifying glass, I can't figure it out. The square footage of the residential units.
Yes, the residential units. Give me a second. I'm pulling up the floor plan here in my documents. Okay. You want the residential units or the?
No, I can see the square footage on the commercial units. I don't know what the square footage of the residential lobby is. What I was trying to get to was a square foot price.
So it looks like the smallest units are 560 square feet, and that's unit 7 on the second floor and third floor. Most of the rest of the units are either 727 square feet, 878 square feet, 743 square feet, and then unit 2 is 1,044 square feet. So they range from 560 to 1,044, with most of them in the 740, 750 range.
Well, if I take the square footage of the commercial and then add another 700 square feet for the lobby area, which is literally a swag. I don't know how they're going to build this. And Mr. Albritton's my building expert on here, but especially if it's block construction, I don't know how they get to the number. It seems very low to me per square foot, which again really isn't my issue. It's their issue. They're going to have to build something as long as it's block. I'm more comfortable with that than stick construction. I am concerned about the parking spaces, probably more than anything. If this were anywhere else, we wouldn't allow it. I don't think. Mr. Delk, would you agree with that? A single parking space per commercial location, then what do you do with your customers?
Well, I think in the downtown area, we eliminated the parking requirement for a lot of our commercial space. So, you know, I don't think
that's why I'm saying if this were anywhere else in the city, this project couldn't go forward because it wouldn't meet our parking requirements, right?
If it were suburban general, no, we would have a I think that's much different environment downtown, but you're correct. If it were out in the suburban area, it would require parking, surface parking.
This one's a real tough one in that, you know, Councilmember Hamilton Albrecht and myself lived here an awful long time, both of you your entire lives. And that property has been hideous for the entire time I've lived here. So, I mean, I am enthusiastic about getting that out of our quarter that all of our residents and visitors see as they go to and from the beach. I just want to make sure projects are viable down the road. And I think to have a commercial space that only has room for the proprietor within a reasonable walking distance is an issue. I mean, they are ultimately going to shoot themselves in the foot. It's going to be impossible to lease if you don't have parking for customers coming to a retail or an office. So really the onus is on them. But I'm comfortable with the 500. The original ask of 750 is a no-go, so I'm going to go ahead and support this. Councilmember Albritton.
Just one more question. If this project goes forward, is this going to go to the CDB?
Goes to building permit.
No, it would go to building permit.
Okay.
Councilmember Beckman.
Okay, so just so that I'm clear, so they're asking for $500,000 for 14 units, maximum 14 units, for 5 years with questionable parking. And so, you know, the idea that you're going to be building these apartments and possibly only have them available for 5 years for rental is odd to me. That doesn't sound, you know, why would you put 14 apartments in a building and then only be committed to renting them out for a maximum of 5 years? I also am concerned a little bit about the office space that they're putting on the bottom and parking. So you've got a tiny amount of parking spaces for both workers in the office, customers in the office, and residents who live there. And then I have a question in light of COVID is like, is there going to be a great demand for office space? Because as you know, as I read, it seems like our world is changing and we don't know what it's going to be post-COVID. And do we have numbers on how many vacant office spaces we already have in the city of Clearwater? So that's another a question. So those are things I want to be clear on as we go forward. And
that is somewhat a function of our economy and capitalists taking chances, and sometimes they make right decisions and sometimes they make incorrect decisions, and they bear the risk. We bear some risk for 5 years, and then after that it's really on their shoulders whether they build something that is adequate to the market.
Yeah.
And so I'm not necessarily comfortable doing their homework and a feasibility study as to whether they're making a good decision or not. I don't know that that's our role. Our role is to make certain that we're being good fiduciaries with the money of the CRA.
Right. And can I just say one more thing, sorry, Amanda, about the blighted building. I mean, I drive by it almost once a day, and it is awful. That block is just awful. But I mean, how long have these people held it? They've chosen to keep it blighted for when they purchased it and just sit on it for whatever right time. So, you know, it's not like they're coming in and they're like, hey, I want to buy this piece of property and revitalize it right now. I mean, they've allowed it to sit there as an eyesore for a number of years, I'm sure.
Councilmember Hamilton had a question. Now I'll come back to you, Ms. Thompson.
Well, I don't really disagree, because I don't know that we're being meant to feel this way, or it's being meant for us to feel this way, but you know, they're basically saying, if you don't give us our $500,000, we're going to just tear it down and make it an empty lot and sell the property. Well, an empty lot would look better than what's standing there right now.
I agree.
I don't have a problem with that. So that that threat doesn't hold water for me. The 5 years is basically, and Amanda, correct me if I'm wrong, but the 5 year in the contract here with the $500,000, they can't flip the property in the first 5 years, can they? Or does it, if they tried to sell the property after the development is done, the new owner would still have to honor everything in that contract, correct? Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Thompson, go ahead.
Oh, she's muted. There we
Okay,
go.
I'm back. For some reason, our speakers in here are just automatically shutting themselves off. But the purpose of the 5 years it was not because the current applicants have an intent to do something other than apartments. They do, and this project is designed to be apartments, will be most successful as apartments. But if they did choose to sell the property, right, or something happened, the property had to be sold, we wanted to ensure that the CRA's money was going to be used for that intended purpose, no matter who the owner was, for a reasonable period of time.
And Amanda, the contract or the request and everything, this isn't to build up to 14 units. This is to build 14 units. This is to build
14 units
to the plans that they have submitted to us.
That is correct.
It will be 14 units.
Yes.
Okay.
I have a few other pieces of information that Councilmember Beckman had asked for. $45,000 a year annual income. The rule of thumb is that you shouldn't spend more than 30% of your income on housing. That breaks down to $13,500 per year. And so monthly, that's $1,125 a month. So,
and is that what they're thinking they're going to charge? Okay.
Yes, it'll be in that range. The other issue with the parking, I sense there's so much uncomfortableness about the parking, but really environmentally shared parking, and in our downtown context, it is the best solution. And this is a compatible use. And it's ideal because you have one owner, one set of owners that are controlling who's leasing, right? Where normally if the office spaces were condoed or owned by someone else, they could put in a night and weekend type retail or office generating use that would conflict with the residents. But this really is the best setup. I'm not saying they couldn't make mistakes or do it wrong, but structurally, this is the best setup for shared parking. And it's not unreasonable to ask employees to walk 350 feet right from a parking lot to an office space. And we are in a downtown environment with sidewalks and buses and bicycling and trails, all of those options. And finally, in terms of the office use, we are still going to see a need for some type of office space. People can't keep everything in their homes, right? Maybe some larger companies might keep a percentage of their workforce remote, but there still will be a need for office and some storefront space. And our downtown towers are almost 100% occupied at this point, largely thanks to Autoloop and Know4, who are still hiring. Right. I mean, at least pre-pandemic, I still think there's a need for cybersecurity, though. So, you know, we still see increased employment in downtown that are taking up most of our office space. And the last thing I'll say about the blight is it's much of downtown is blighted. Much of downtown hasn't had investment. And at the CRA, we really want to partner in looking forward. We don't want to punish people for everything that's happened in the past. We want to protect the city's interest, which we have with these different agreements, but we have to have partners to invest in what we want to see happen in downtown. And that's what this project is. So I really appreciate all your comments. And I just want to reassure you that we have over $1 million in unencumbered funds for different projects moving forward. We'll receive more money in October, right, with city and county TIF. And for us to be able to build new rental housing for $35,000 a unit, that's a really amazing project.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Mr. Bunker.
So if what we really need are apartments, why don't they make a two-story apartment building? Put more apartments in there instead of two-story. Right, but instead of retail on the bottom, why not just make it all apartments? Is that something that they've considered?
The downtown has always envisioned having mixed use.
Okay.
So that you have commercial or retail on the bottom floors, and then you have residential above.
All
with
right.
the possibility that somebody who is leasing the commercial space below is actually living above.
I also don't know that to have your front door open onto Chestnut is attractive right there.
Put the back.
The questions or comments? Mr. Bunker, you didn't come through.
Sorry, that's okay.
And we have not had public comment on this issue yet.
I understand that. That's next. Anyone from the public speak to this item? Seeing none, do I have a?
We have one person coming in.
Okay.
Good morning. My name is Mike Reardon. First of all, congratulations to Councilmember Bunker, Beckman, and Mayor Kretikos. I know this property extremely well. I was actually looking at maybe buying it from Sue and Dr. Minkoff. They were looking for cash. I was thinking brewery and bike shop, but there's no parking if you have a brewery. Best thing about this property is the Quonset hut wood ceiling. So I hope they save that wood and tear it down. It was not purchased for $200,000 by the Minkoffs. The loan was restructured. They had a partner who borrowed money on it for Clearwater Villages or something. And then he borrowed money that it changed to just Dr. Minkoff and Sue. That's why it says $200,000. They had a contract for $1 million offered, but Sue wasn't made aware of it by DeChico Development back in '06 when they tried to buy the whole block, who sold the property that Brian negotiated when Councilman Albert and I moved out of where the Walgreens is. I had keys to this property. I walk through it all the time. The tenant in my building that had storage space moved over there. I took him over there and made arrangements for him to meet Sue Minkoff and rent. I have no problem with this project because Brian mentioned, I didn't know this, that the taxes are from the downtown core. But what it needs to be, though, for the public to buy into it, and the feedback I'm getting from people, it needs to be like a 20-year or 25-year guarantee apartment rentals. Because in 5 years, for $500,000, this property could be turned around and sold to any entity of any kind and turned into anything that meets, guidelines for downtown Clearwater. I don't think a 5-year guarantee is at all acceptable for these units for $500,000 grants. I like a lot of other stuff about it. I don't agree with the contract that says that the developers don't have the money to do it if they didn't get the $500,000. What I hope to see, if Mr. Cassano still owns the 4 acres over there at MLK and Laura and Booth, the old high school lot, I hope he's back in here asking for another $500,000 to develop the property over there, because I know the Lennar Homes property project fell through that was going to buy it from him back around 15 or 16 or so. I watched Lennar survey a property. I don't know why the deal died, but that would be a much bigger, better project than this little thing. And nobody with deep pockets or can afford higher living is going to live on this corner. This corner is chaos with traffic and noise. You definitely want to be on the second and third floor. But overall, if they could extend it to 20 or 25 years, guaranteed, no matter who owns it, I think it's worth the effort, and I wish them luck. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reardon. Anyone else from the public? I'll entertain a motion. Councilmember Beckman.
Yeah, how feasible would it be to ask for a longer length of the apartment rental? Because that truly is a concern of mine. 5 years flies by fast. Can we extend it to 10 or 15 or something?
Ms. Thompson, you're muted again.
Oh man, patience with technology. Okay. 5 years is extremely typical for the CRA, and I'm not using that as an excuse. I'm just letting you know that that's the typical standard. The applicant's attorney, I just looked at him and he said that they're comfortable with 5 years and they feel that that's a reasonable amount of time. And I would agree. We're really talking about 7 years, right? It's going to be 18 to 24 months to have it constructed and open, and then 5 years beyond that. Land use is very difficult, right? Private property rights. we do not control, the city and CRA can't control what everyone does with their property, right? They have to meet the zoning. And if they meet the zoning and are allowable uses, they go on and live their life. So any property at any point in time can be sold for any allowable use under our zoning ordinance, which can be very frustrating, right? But that is how it is. And I think that we've come to a reasonable agreement with the 5 years for the amount of money that we're investing for $35,000 per unit. And I believe that it's going to stay rental longer than that, because that's what our market's going to support. And that's how the property owners will make money.
What is the longest term that we've ever had, Ms. Aiken? Do you know that? I mean, Water's Edge, the Residence Inn, Station Square, those were some of the biggest projects.
Those development agreements varied between 10 and 20 years, but it really wasn't an issue. Water's Edge being an example, that's condominium. That's not going to convert to a different use. So this is really sort of unique in that regard. You can, of course, ask for a longer period. Legally, you can. Whether or not they find that acceptable is a different issue.
Councilmember Hamilton and then Albritton.
Well, I understand and Mr. Reardon and Councilmember Beckman, looking for longer term, but I look at this project, look at the location, the size of the units, and the lack of amenities. I mean, you're getting an apartment, you're getting a unit. If you tried to sell these as condo units, when you're buying a condo, you want other amenities in a condo. When you're buying a condo, you want a pool, you want other amenities in the building, such as, heck, even in rental apartments now, you want all the other amenities. So given what these are, where they are, while I see, can understand people wanting a little more time, I think these are going to be rental apartments for as long as that building's there after this project's built. I really believe that.
Councilmember Albritton.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that, when we give grants to restaurants and they get up as high as what we're giving here, I mean, we don't put any more of a limit on time with them, and they could fail in 5 years. And, and then you have nothing basically, except what they, maybe another restaurant could move in. But, I understand your concerns about making it longer, but then it is a lot of risk. There's still risk on that corner. And, I just think that it's in line with what we've done with the CRA as long as I can remember. So.
Councilmember Beckman.
I guess so. I could understand that feedback, but if a lot of the feedback has been, these are going to be great, we anticipate they're going to be full, but if that's true, then let's extend it to 10 years. I mean, they don't, if they're so confident, let's just ask for a 10-year, but that's just my input.
Oh, I need a motion at this point.
I would
You can make a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve agenda item 4.4.
And I'll second.
Discussion.
What are we motioning? What is the actual, what are we agreeing to right now?
The motion that was just made is the agenda item as it stands.
To award 500,000 or to move it forward for Thursday night?
No, we make CRA decisions at the CRA.
All right, that's right.
So
okay.
This is it. This is where the vote occurs. That's why I asked if you wanted to make a motion for 10 years, you need to jump forward and do that.
Okay.
And then you can see if you get a second, and if so, we can take a vote. Now we have a motion for the agenda item as it stands.
And this includes the amended language for the off-site parking.
Yes.
Yes.
So I have a motion and a second. Any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
No.
The motion passes 3-2 with Councilmember Hamilton, Albritton, and Hibbert in favor. Beckman and Bunker opposed.